Well, welcome to the Solutions Revolution. Thank you for joining us once again. And you may remember, if you were tuning in last week, that our conversation ended. We were talking about scalar energy and what it could do from us from a health perspective, which is a perfect introduction in a way to our guest tonight, who is Ken Rohla. And Ken, I've had the privilege of interviewing before, and I learned so much about so many different subjects. It was absolutely amazing. So I'm incredibly pleased to welcome Ken onto the show. Thank you so much for joining us, Ken.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, brilliant. So perhaps with that little segue, you could tell us a little bit about yourself, and then perhaps tell us about scalar energy. What I'd really like for people to understand is, at the end of this conversation, what scalar energy means, understanding that we ourselves are scalar energy generators, and the importance of water within us, and as many other subjects as we can possibly fit in, quite honestly. So, welcome, Ken.
Okay. Well, about myself, my background is actually in electrical engineering. That's what I went to school for. But I worked in the medical system here in the United States for about 23 years and did a variety of jobs, from working in hospital emergency rooms, drawing blood on emergency patients, and working in pathology labs, doing specimen testing and computer facilities and labs and things. So I've had a lot of work in the medical system for quite a few years, from the patient level all the way up to the national policy level, working with politicians and lobbyists at the state and national policy level. So I've seen the medical system, from the whole spectrum, from the patient to the national policy level. And as it turns out, I was born sick myself. As a child, I was very hypoglycemic, and had a lot of health issues, particularly blood sugar swings, mood swings, energy swings that depended on my, what I ate and how much sleep I had. And so it wasn't until I was working in the medical system that I started looking for an answer, and I went to the wellness clinic that we had. I guess you would call it. It was really not a clinic, it was a hospital. Our wellness program consisted of going to hospitals, since I worked for the North Carolina Hospital Association. And so basically, whatever doctor I went to had the solution for me, and it was, whatever he was pushing. And of course, none of it really worked. And so I searched and searched, and eventually I came across a friend who had used living foods and detoxification and natural methods for healing similar types of issues. And so I started studying that, and spent a bunch of years and a ton of money going to different types of naturopathic doctors and things, and figured out what really worked. Healed myself up, with living foods and herbs and detoxification, emotional healing, things like that. And had absolutely no intention whatsoever of, starting a career in it or teaching it or anything. But when I moved from North Carolina to Florida, and I started a pottery career, making pottery, and people would come to my house and visit, and they would ask me, why I didn't have a television, and why my refrigerator was full of nothing but fruits and vegetables and, unprocessed foods and that kind of stuff, and everything was organic. And of course, the equipment I had in my kitchen, like juicers and dehydrators and things, to support the living foods lifestyle. Everybody wanted to know about that and why I was doing it. And I got tired of having long conversations explaining what I was doing and why I was doing it. And so a friend of mine suggested that I hold a workshop for my friends to explain it all to them and get them off my back. And so I did that, and there was about 15 people in the class, and I spent the entire day with them. I took them to a health food store, showed them what really worked, what didn't, and when I got done, I thought, great, now they'll leave me alone. But they went and told people, and then I had to do another workshop, and they went and told people, and I had to do another workshop, and they kept telling people, and it kept growing and growing and growing, and ultimately it overtook my pottery business. And then 9/11 happened here in the United States, and the pottery business tanked, and this stuff was going gangbusters. So it was kind of decided for me to do this natural health stuff. And I was very fortunate right out of college that I had a boss who taught me that if you want to be good at something, learn from the best that you can afford to. And so when I decided to choose natural health for a career, I started studying with people who were pioneers in natural health, who were healing so-called incurable diseases of every kind, and even seeing things I didn't think were able to be healed, getting healed, and sometimes very quickly. And so I just spent my focus because of that with these people, focusing on healing major disease, life-threatening disease, that kind of stuff, and also things like athletic performance and job performance enhancement, and then just improving health to whatever degree people were interested in. So I've been doing it now for about 25 years, and I no longer have time to do individual consults, but my focus has been on finding solutions or creating solutions for these major threats that we have to our health, like nuclear fallout or geoengineering chemicals coming down on us, genetically engineered microbes, genetically engineered food, those kinds of things. So that's been my focus in the last few months. I've been especially focused on solutions for water purification and enhancing water to make it healing and regenerative, and expand consciousness. And then also I've been focused on solutions for removing radiation from the environment, the nuclear fallout from Fukushima and Chernobyl and all these other accidents, removing it from the atmosphere, removing it from the environment like the land and the soil and crops and plants, and also removing it from our bodies and neutralizing it as well. And so there are ways to do that, and that's why I teach. So that's kind of in a nutshell where I'm coming from. Because I've got this background in engineering and physics, and I've always had an interest in quantum physics, I tend to see things in these solutions that other people don't see, and so I just expand upon that.
Well, that's tremendous because this program is called the Solutions Revolution, and people spend an awful lot of time looking at the problems. And while it's necessary to understand what the problems are, of course, some people get completely sucked into it and get stuck with the problems. But clearly what we're about is the solutions and the incredible number of them. It's just overwhelming how many solutions there are to everything, and actually how simple they are compared to the problems. So the problems are hugely complex, modern medicine, as they call it, hugely complex. But health, actually quite easy, isn't it? I mean, it's really relatively straightforward, and I love your approach of simplicity explaining it. So do tell us what you've learned.
Well, that's very true. I find the most sophisticated technologies and the most sophisticated solutions are the simplest and the most affordable typically. They're not always the most convenient, and so sometimes people may want to spend some money to buy convenience, but absolutely, there are many, many foods and herbs and minerals that can neutralize radioactivity in the body and remove it from the body. One thing I teach for people that don't have a lot of money to spend on supplements is how to make fermented brews that you can use for healing and detoxification. There's amazing solutions, and you're right, they're not expensive, they're not complicated. When you see how the universe works energetically and how thought creates reality, the details may be a bear. To describe it in terms of physics or mathematics may be detailed, but conceptually it's very simple. And when you see these systems that we have in place on this planet, whether it be our food systems, our healthcare systems, our energy systems, all of them, they're all fundamentally flawed because the basic fundamental philosophy of how they're implemented is flawed. And therefore you see an ever-continuing complexity that becomes more and more complex as those systems continue to operate, because they always have toxic side effects. And so we've reached a culmination on this planet of where these systems, just in a very few decades, they've culminated into unsustainable systems that are destroying the planet and destroying us. And so we have to reboot at a fundamental level, at a very basic philosophical level, about everything from our food and how we eat it and how we prepare it and how we raise it, to our healthcare system, to our energy production systems. And the solutions are already out there. They've been out there for a long time. They're very simple. They're very affordable. Most people can implement them themselves. For example, free energy technologies. I worked with free energy technologies that were very simple. Maintaining health, even amidst a world full of radioactivity and GMOs and geoengineering pollutants, it's still very simple and affordable to maintain your health in it as long as you understand how. So that's what I do is I'm doing workshops and webinars and online events to teach people how to create these solutions for themselves very affordably.
I think an amusing way to see the perspective of how simple or difficult this stuff is, most people, when you mention the word Einstein, they connect that with very difficult, hard to understand stuff. But when Einstein was asked to explain the theory of relativity, he said, well, if you're with a beautiful woman for an hour, it feels like a minute. And if you're sitting on a red hot stove for a minute, it feels like an hour. That's the theory of relativity. And so, everybody can understand it.
Exactly. And Einstein also said that any concept that can't be explained to a layperson isn't worth having. And so that's what I see in studying, the details of how energy and matter work in the universe. To describe it in a very precise term mathematically can be a little involved, but the concept of how it works and what you can do practically with it, it's very simple. There have been people throughout history, shamans and mystics and gurus and teachers and swamis who have talked about all of these various things that I talk about and teach, and they didn't have PhDs in physics. These were people from the jungles of South America or the outback of Australia or Africa or wherever. They weren't necessarily, Greek philosophers and sophisticated people per se, but they understood the fundamentals. And one of the overall fundamentals is that consciousness creates reality. So when you get that one basic tenet, then that trumps everything else. There's all kinds of predictions about dire consequences and this and that, the other, based on, these computer models or whatever. But the big trump card that people forget is that consciousness creates reality, and human beings, when they're not being manipulated and controlled and being mind controlled, we can manifest amazing things. And I've seen solutions for all these problems that we have on our planet, the physical problems like pollution, radioactivity, GMOs, all this stuff. There are solutions for all these things, and they're just waiting in the wings to be allowed out. So we could clean up this planet very quickly. We can neutralize radioactivity very quickly. There's 61 patents worldwide for methods for completely neutralizing or reducing the radioactivity of radioactive elements and waste. I've witnessed it done. And, there's free energy technologies. I witnessed them in use, and there's tons of it on YouTube and Google that you can see. It's not all fake. It's not all fraud. And fortunately, now there are heavy-duty scientists who are also backing up these solutions with the science and the math to go with it.
Yes, indeed. Now, you were privileged enough to work along with Ewell Brown. Hopefully several people listening to this show will understand who Ewell Brown is, but it would be very interesting, I think, for you to explain what he discovered and the technologies around it and where we are now with it.
Okay. Well, Brown developed a method of water fuel technology that actually has been around since the 1800s. But in the 1960s, a man named William A. Rhodes developed a water fuel generator that, for whatever reason, didn't come out with it as a fuel. I think he probably knew that it would mean dire consequences for him. So he came out with this fuel to be used, a water welder. And that welder had very strange quantum properties. The flame that came off of it was a regular blue flame like a normal welder would have, but when it was put to any materials, it would react with the materials at the atomic level and rearrange the atomic structure of the material as it burned it. And so you could weld anything to anything with it. And I used one of these welders, not from Rhodes, but one of Brown, so I can attest to what it will do. But Rhodes came up with the concept, and that welder, by the way, is still on the market from a company in Arizona. I forget the name of them now. But Brown and a man named Andrija Puharich back in the 60s saw Rhodes' work, and they extrapolated from it and developed their own water fuel technologies. Puharich was a brilliant scientist who had developed a lot of different technologies. He had worked with scalar energy devices. He developed a scalar wave generator that was implemented into a wristwatch that's called the Tesla watch. And that device would put out scalar waves that would affect the blood and the nervous system and de-stress you and protect you against EMF. He came out with a water fuel car in the 70s, and he was very well respected in scientific and military and intelligence communities and in the government. And it turns out that the Rockefeller family were friends of his, and because they were so heavily invested in oil, they warned him not to come out with his water-powered car, and so he didn't. He knew the consequences would be severe. So he didn't do anything with it. Ewell Brown played with it in the 70s, and by the time I met him in the 90s, he had developed a water fuel welder and was also using it as fuel for vehicles, and started a marketing campaign across the United States, touring all across the country and filling stadiums full of people, showing and demonstrating his water fuel technology and what it would do. And it was a very interesting fuel. It was a gas. It was a gaseous phase of water. We're told there are three phases of water: liquid, solid when it's frozen, and then steam. But there's actually a fourth phase, at least a fourth phase of water, where it can exist as a gas, but it's not steam. And that is this form that is now being called Brown's gas, or HHO, or hydroxy. And it has, like I said, a lot of strange quantum properties. And also, when you ignite it, it doesn't explode, it implodes back into pure water. So there have been lots of other people that have taken that technology, like, for example, Stanley Meyer back in the 80s. He had developed water fuel technology that was, I think, probably one of the best implementations, where you could take polluted water or even radioactive water, and using this fuel cell, you could extract the H2O out of it, convert it into this HHO gas, combust it in an engine, create a vacuum, run the engine on a vacuum, or add it to gasoline and have it using explosion, but having it run much leaner and with much less gasoline. And it would leave behind, the fuel cell would leave behind the pollutants, which you could then take the flame to and burn the pollutants. And because the flame reacts at a quantum level, it would actually rearrange these toxic elements, even radioactive elements, and convert them to other elements that were non-toxic and non-radioactive. And so Meyer wound up signing a $30 million contract with the U.S. military to power all their vehicles with water. And within 30 minutes of doing that, he was poisoned and dead. And so Brown knew these risks, and yet he was willing to forge ahead with it. And so he did. He was getting it out to a lot of people. He had 2,000 dealers in his network that were going to be selling it. And at every turn, he got thwarted by, presumably, either the CIA or some of these industries that he was threatening. But all of his emails and faxes and communications were intercepted and very often stopped. And he had death threats. He got shot at a few times. And ultimately, I believe he died prematurely. I was told that he was given cancer, but he never did get it out onto the market in a viable way, because his business was being interrupted with so much. But during the course of all that, I was, attending meetings with Brown and engineers and physicists and inventors, and they demonstrated it neutralizing radioactivity by taking a radioactive material and burning it with, I believe it was aluminum and iron, and you would get this reaction at the quantum level that would convert the radioactive elements to non-radioactive. And Brown did that demonstration quite a bit. He did it in front of the U.S. Department of Energy officials. He did it in front of senators. They filmed it, and they gave it to every single congressman in the United States, including Al Gore, who famously, came out with his movie An Inconvenient Truth. And for whatever reason, none of these people, there were a handful of politicians who got interested and wanted to develop it, and they got shut up, and it all got hushed up and sequestered away. But I witnessed it firsthand, neutralizing radioactivity with measuring equipment and all, so I know it works. And that's just one method for neutralizing radioactivity. As I mentioned, there's about 61 methods. And because I do these talks a lot where I'm presenting a lot of this cutting edge information about technology, a lot of times people don't believe it. So I've set up a web page where people can go and they can actually see these patents and they can see other evidence for what I'm talking about. That link is radiationlinks.freshandalive.com. radiationlinks.freshandalive.com. If you go there, you can see at the top of the page 61 patents for methods for neutralizing radioactivity, including 8 in Japan. So, and these have been around since at least the 70s. There was a professor emeritus of physics at Arizona State University named Radha Roy. That's R-A-D-H-A, Roy, R-O-Y. You can Google or go on YouTube and search on the Roy process, and you can see him talking about this in the news back in the 80s, neutralizing radioactivity very affordably. And this guy is a professor emeritus of physics. He literally wrote textbooks on nuclear engineering for universities, and yet he couldn't get these solutions out to the public either. He was stopped at every turn. So there are many, many solutions like that that have been on the market, that have been announced, and that have been proven. It's not all pseudoscience and voodoo, and you can see it there on that page. So what we have is an industry, the nuclear industry, which makes huge amounts of money, first of all, off the technologies. So, the profit motive is there to stop any competing technology from interfering with theirs. But also, the nuclear power industry is really a justification for the nuclear weapons industry, which is where the real money is made. And the countries that have nuclear weapons do not want these alternative technologies out, particularly ones that neutralize radioactivity, because they can neutralize their bombs, and then they would lose their nuclear advantage in warfare. And so that's why these solutions for nuclear waste and radioactivity and fallout are not being allowed out. It's not necessarily that we don't want to clean up the pollution. It's that the countries that have the nuclear weapons advantage do not want to give it up. And it also, of course, these technologies imply free energy. Many of them can be used for free energy as well. And so, that would destroy the entire petroleum-based economy that we're all living under. And so, I'm optimistic. I can see it, these technologies increasingly are coming out more and more and more. So I'm very optimistic that ultimately they will be, the norm. But these existing industries and cartels are not going to go down without a fight. Although, interestingly enough, the Rockefellers recently, they got out of oil stocks. So they've divested themselves of their investments in oil, which is very telling. I think they know what's coming. And so I'm very optimistic about it. But yeah, that's just one set of solutions for these messes. There's also a man named John Hutchison who claims to have a scalar energy device, and he's going around cleaning up radioactive water, including the oceans, in vast areas. And I have no way of knowing if that's true or not, but theoretically it certainly is possible, because scalar energy can definitely alter matter and potentially alter these radioactive elements. But in the meantime, I've been focusing on practical, real solutions that everyday people can use to get this stuff out of their bodies, neutralize it if it gets in them, or pull it out, get it out of their environment, out of their yard, out of the sky, those kinds of things. And I'm not just reading stuff on the internet doing this. 3 weeks ago, actually, I ingested some hot radioactive particles, and I got very sick. And but fortunately, I was already taking supplements and eating food and juicing and doing things that pulled it out very quickly. And it just so happened I was testing a zeolite supplement, which is a type of mineral that will pull radioactive particles out of the body. And so this particular supplement is called Advanced TRS. It's I don't know if it's available in the UK. It's available online, so I'm sure you could buy it in the UK. But Advanced TRS, it comes from a company called Cosiva, and it's a form of zeolite mineral that is a little bit different than the usual zeolites. Zeolites are minerals that are formed when lava, molten lava, hits ocean water. And when that occurs, you get this mineral structure that at the molecular level, it looks like the molecules look like little geodesic domes, little cages that have a strong negative charge inside of them. And one thing that all toxins and pathogens have in the body, one common thing they have is that they all have a positive charge on them. So these zeolites, when you ingest them, they have a strong negative charge, and they have this cage structure, and they circulate through the body, and they grab onto these free radicals and toxins and pathogens and lock them into their cage structure, and it neutralizes the charge, and then they get flushed out of the body. Well, one of the things that makes these zeolites not as effective as they could be is that these zeolites typically come from mines, deposits underground where there used to be oceans. And so sometimes other minerals will get lodged into some of the zeolite cages. So when you're taking zeolite supplements, they don't necessarily have all of the cages available to grab onto these toxins. And very often the particle sizes are too big to get deep into cells and pull these toxins out. So this scientist who developed Advanced TRS figured out how to make the particles monoatomic, and then, which means individual atoms bound to, or individual molecules, not bound to each other. And then he figured out a way to use vitamin C to clean the cages of the zeolites that had already attached to other minerals. And so he was able to get 100% of the cages to be ready to latch onto toxins. So it's much more effective. It can get deeper into cells. It can go anywhere in the body that water can go, and yet it can pull these toxins out. So I just happened to be taking this supplement. I was testing it because someone had told me about it. And apparently I ingested some hot radioactive particles because I had my entire meal was a Living Foods meal. So I had produce that I had grown outdoors myself. I had some from a health food store, and I was having a big salad and some stuff. And about an hour after I ate, I started getting indigestion and gas. And I just thought, that's kind of odd. But by the next day, it was much worse, and I could tell there was something seriously wrong because my intestines felt like they were twisted or clogged up. What I was eating wasn't getting through all the way, and I was constipated, and I had lots and lots of gas, and it just felt very serious. It didn't feel like just a little indigestion, and I got concerned, and it got worse. The next day it was even worse, and it was a little painful, and my liver was very tender, so I wound up scheduling a session with a friend of mine who has a device called a QXCI Skio, which is a quantum biofeedback device that can tell all kinds of interesting things, what's going on in your body. And but I couldn't get an appointment for about 3 days. And by the time I got to the appointment, the symptoms were mostly past, and I felt much better. And so when I wound up getting this reading, it showed that I had gamma and beta and alpha radiation damage in my intestinal tract, which is the kind of radiation that comes off of atomic bombs and nuclear particles. But it wasn't showing the particles in the body, so apparently whatever I ingested got pulled out between these detox tonics that I do every day and these zeolites and the diet and juicing and everything that I was doing. So I know from firsthand that you can really pull this stuff out of the body, and You can also, if you get these elements stuck in tissue or in the thyroid, like what is common, you can pull them out and you can transmute them into other elements. There was a man named Louis Kervran, who was a French physicist, who figured out and proved that the human body can transmute elements from one to another within the body. And for a lot of people, that sounds like a bunch of New Age nonsense or alchemy. But if you think about it, nuclear particles transmute by themselves automatically. It just typically takes a long time. But they break down, from one element to another, from radioactive to non-radioactive. And so the same thing can happen with elements within the body. The body has the ability, for example, to take silica and turn it into calcium. And Kervran proved this. Excuse me. So what I've done is found the foods and supplements and things that will do all of these things. That will pull these particles out of the body, that will transmute them into non-toxic elements, excuse me, and send you on your merry way. And when I was having this problem, excuse me, I've got a bit of a chest cold after getting that radiation in my body. So anyway, excuse me. So, when these kinds of things happen to me, a lot of people would think, oh, when it's happening to them, they think, oh, this is terrible, and woe is me, and oh, why me? And I'm looking at this thinking, okay, what's really going on here, and what's the purpose in this? And, in a few days, I realized, well, this was just a lesson for me to get firsthand experience at pulling these elements out of the body. And then a couple days later, wouldn't you know it, this doctor friend of mine, Gabriel Cousins, out in Arizona at the Tree of Life Rejuvenation Center, calls up, and I was telling him what was going on, and he said, oh, well, we've developed this supplement that is the only thing we've seen that will pull 100% of these radioactive particles out of the body and neutralize them and heal the damage from them. And so I wound up getting some of that. And that's testing out very well. It's a product called Rad Neutral, Neutral, Rad, R-A-D, Rad Neutral. You can get it at treeoflife.nu, as in November uniform. You can't get it through their website. You have to call them and order it, or I guess email them maybe. But it is on their website, but the website's not working right. So, every time that things like this happen to me, the solutions come forward, and it's because I expect them to. And this is something that I want to impress upon people, is to understand that thought really creates reality. We really create our reality and co-create our reality. And so when you understand that, whenever these kinds of problems come up, all you have to do is search around for the solutions, and you will find them. And so, if you just follow me, and as far as these types of things go, that's what I do for a living, and I find these solutions and I bring them out to people. So, so that's been one of my big focuses lately, is dealing with all the fallout, radiation, and getting it out of our bodies and environments.
Could I ask you to turn your camera off, because we're losing a bit of bandwidth, and hopefully they'll improve the audio. Thank you. So could I just go back to a couple of points? Now, I appreciate what you were saying about neutralizing radiation and from bombs. Is there a way to neutralize the bombs themselves so they need never go off in the first place?
There are. For example, there's a former NASA nuclear engineer named Thomas Bearden who has developed methods and applied for patents on methods for neutralizing radioactivity that can neutralize bombs. It's scalar wave technology, by the way. Scalar waves, at some point we'll have to get into a conversation about what they are. But scalar waves are kind of a fundamental faster-than-light energy that is what matter and energy that we can see and measure is composed of. And so it can alter matter as well as create matter. And so very cutting-edge people are using scalar waves to neutralize radioactivity. There's also Mehran Kesh, who's an Iranian physicist living in Belgium, who's also developed what he calls a magnetic plasma technology that can neutralize radioactive bombs. And in fact, he says they can neutralize any kind of weapon from a rifle to an aircraft carrier. And understandably, he's had all kinds of death threats and against him. And then, if you I've had encounters with ETs, and they've got technologies that can neutralize it as well. And if you look, for example, at the work of David Wilcock and others like Dr. Stephen Greer here in the United States, who are bringing out high-level military officials and people who have had these extraterrestrial encounters, and what they're saying is that UFO activity is also, they've got UFOs coming and neutralizing missile silos and colliders and all kinds of things when we get into dangerous areas with them. And so David Wilcock has a program on GaiamTV.com. That's GAIAMTV.com, called Wisdom Teachings. And he digs up a lot of interesting news about what these military and government officials around the world are bringing out. For example, you've probably seen Paul Hellyer, who was the former Minister of Defense of Canada in the 60s and 70s. This is a guy who was in charge of all the military branches in Canada, and he has testified before the U.S. Congress in unofficial hearings, and he's all over YouTube saying that not only has Canada and the United States and other countries had extraterrestrial contact, not UFO contact, but extraterrestrial contact. He says also that there are two extraterrestrials that he knows of working in the U.S. Pentagon. So when you got high-level people like that coming out, of course they're not going to be on the 7 o'clock mainstream news, but it's out there if you're looking for it. And so there are multiple ways of neutralizing these nuclear warheads and devices. These colliders, for example, the Hadron Collider in Europe, which they're doing some very dangerous experiments, or they were attempting to, that weren't working. I believe some of it, I think, is ET intervention, but there are definitely people, scientists, who are developing technologies to stop and neutralize this stuff. And you've got people like Dr. Konstantin Meil in Germany, who's a scalar physicist who's developed all kinds of free energy technologies and things with scalar energy. But yes, there are ways to neutralize the bombs. There are ways to neutralize the fallout coming down on us. There's ways to neutralize the radioactivity in the oceans. There's ways to neutralize it on your property and in your soil and on the plants in your yard. And there's ways to neutralize it in your body and get it out of your body. There's solutions for all of it, and they're not expensive. For example, getting it out of your environment. There's a Japanese professor named Teruo Higa. He was an agriculture professor in Japan, in Okinawa. And he was working with microbes for agriculture and ultimately came up with this microbe mixture that he calls effective microorganisms. And you can take this bacteria culture that he's got. I sell it on my website, actually. It's inexpensive. I think it's $22 for a liter. And you can mix it with molasses and water, and you can make gallons and gallons of it. And then you can take small amounts of it and mix it with thousands of parts of water, and you can spray it on your soil and on your crops or your garden or your plants. And it will break down the fallout and make it non-radioactive. And that's not conjecture. Higa has proven it. You can go to that Radiation Links page on my website, which again is radiationlinks.freshandalive.com. If you go there, you can see a video of a Japanese farmer in Fukushima City who has no measurable radiation on his soil or his crops or the produce that he's selling, when all the farmers around him have massive radioactivity on all of theirs and they can't sell their produce. This guy is able to sell completely radiation-free produce, and all he's doing is spraying these effective microorganisms on his soil and on his crops. And so it's ridiculously cheap. Very simple to do, and anybody can do it. That's what I teach in my workshops, is how to do advanced fermentation in various ways so that you can be ingesting these things, you can be putting them on your environment, and clearing this stuff and not having it affect you. So there's lots of really cool solutions out there.
Well, let's hope after the break there's enough time to talk more about EM. And just before we do break, just pulling us back into a couple of quick things. One of the reasons maybe that they were pulling out of oil well shares is that more and more people are twigging the fact that the old oil wells that ran out of oil years ago, of course, are filling up again, and the lie
Right.
that the lie that it's an inexhaustible fossil fuel, and be very worried and pay lots of money because it's about to run out. Of course, it's all a complete lie.
Absolutely. And, uh, of course, there are people supposedly in those industries who are saying that we've already got huge fields of oil that are being kept out of, out of public access. But yeah, the Russians discovered that that oil wells refill because their economy is very dependent on oil, and they were very concerned that their oil well is going to run out and their economy is going to be destroyed. And so they started drilling very, very deep, 20, 30,000 feet deep. And they discovered that at those depths, they were finding new oil that was being created in just a few decades. And like you said, these oil wells were refilling. That's why you're seeing some of these disasters like this New Horizon oil spill in the United States that poisoned the Gulf of Mexico, because the Russians realized when you drill that deep, you hit extremely high pressures of oil and gas at those depths, and it can blow a well open and fissure to the surface. And then it can also create other fissures around that can't be capped. And so they learned not to do that kind of drilling underneath the ocean or bodies of water. But the United States and BP from the UK, with their greed, started doing that kind of drilling underneath the ocean, and the result is, the New Horizon oil spill, which supposedly is fissuring in other places around the Gulf. So yeah, you know, oil is not a fossil fuel like we've been told it is. There's plenty of science showing that. It's not in the United States. It's mostly from Russia.